Welcome back to the channel. We're going to continue working on our 1993 Mustang GT convertible. Last time we got everything pulled around a little bit. This time we're going to get the engine out of our way so that we can work on these frame rails and get our aprons and radiator support in there. So let's get the engine out of here so that we have some room to work. Now originally I was going to drop the engine, trans, subframe and everything and just leave it as an assembly. But I need to separate the engine and trans. I got some oil leaks to fix. It's starting to look like a BMW under this car. So since we have to take the engine and trans apart, I might as well just take the engine out by itself, leave the trans in there, leave the suspension in there, and then I can fix all my leaks and have the engine out of our way. The engine's really the only thing that's in the way anyway. So that's what we're gonna do. I don't know if it comes out this way very easily, but we're about to find out.
So we'll start off with something easy before we work up to the big struggles. Our alternator's right up here on top, so we're just going to pull the plugs off of that. We're going to leave all our accessories on there, just take it all off in one big piece. The less stuff I take off, the less stuff I forget where it goes. Now we're going to disconnect the throttle cables. There's a cruise control cable, a throttle cable, and a trans kickdown cable. Don't ask me which one is which, I didn't bother to trace them. All I know is they all have to come off. So we disconnected them all from the throttle linkage, and now we can unbolt some of the cables from their little bracket and do our best not to lose the screws down in Narnia. Now we can pull the cable out of the bracket. Our cables at the end are kind of piggybacked, so we'll unclip them from each other so that they can go their separate ways. Disconnect this vacuum line before we break it. And we'll unplug our throttle position sensor before we end up breaking that, since the cable goes on the other side of it. Now we can get to that other screw for our other cable. Kind of. We got enough of it to get it out of there. Now for the fun one. This one has a little plastic tab. You have to pry it back enough to disengage it, but not enough to break it. And every piece of plastic on this car is 30 years old and very brittle, so I'm trying not to break anything. It's going to take a lot of patience to get this thing apart without breaking anything. Plastic didn't last long back then. The fact that all these clips and connectors are still in one piece is amazing. Wish I could say the same for our lift that just keeps dropping. So you push that little tab back and then twist it. Twist the cable and it'll come out of there and slide it out. We didn't break anything. Yet. Give me time. Now we have another vacuum line on the back of our manifold, so we're going to pry that off of there. And you can disconnect the little block and all these vacuum lines will stay with the engine, but I really don't want to be working around them because I'm surprised I haven't cracked them already. So we're just going to disconnect them from the engine, tuck them out of our way, and hopefully not break them. And there's our little block. It's also supposed to be attached to all the secondary air injection, but somebody removed the air pump. Probably Mother Nature locked it up and they replaced it with just an idler pulley. Now our biggest challenge. This is the main harness that powers everything, all the injectors and everything on the engine. We need to disconnect it. And these tabs are very brittle. So we're going to do our best to not break them. There's one on each side. Just pry out on them. Could just pull it apart, but I'd probably break it then. At least they put it right on top of the engine where it's easy to work on. And also gets the most heat to help deteriorate that plastic that much faster. Really need about 4 hands for this. One to hold the plug, one to work the tab, one to stab your other hand with the pick, and one to put the band-aid on. Good thing no one's timing me on this. If I got paid on commission for this one, I'd be starving. Success. No broken tabs. Plug is disconnected. Now we get to do it again. Luckily this harness stayed attached to its little bracket, so it requires one less hand. The band-aid hand. We don't need the screwdriver to pry up on it. We can just pull up a little bit. It'll hold the other end of the plug. Then we just work the tabs. Success. No broken connectors. At least not up here. So now we'll head over here, disconnect our ground wire from our apron. We'll put the bolt back in there so we know where it goes. We'll unscramble our spaghetti here. Looks like we had a little melting going on there. So we can unplug that because the rest of that's going with the body harness. And we'll tuck this ground cable up on top of our engine. Now we can unbolt the power cable from our starter solenoid. And we'll unbolt the rest of it. Just going to take the harness that goes down to the bottom of the engine off. We'll put our positive cable back on there so we don't lose it. Put the nut back on there. And it sounds like the 405 is right on time. Oh, the joy of filming your videos at Grand Central Station. And disconnect our other harness here. It's a little oily, so I need a rag to hold on to it. Pull our tabs up a little bit and pull it apart. And tuck all this stuff up on the engine and the rest of it up on our apron. Now we'll use our adjustable hammer to loosen up our AC line. Make sure you grab the metric size. And pull our AC line off. We're going to cap all these off so nothing gets in them while we're waiting to put our engine back in. Disconnect our vacuum feed line to our vacuum tee up on the cowl. I don't remember those having a hose clamp on them before, but this one does. So I guess I'll put it back on if I don't lose it. Now we can disconnect our module. Ford decided they needed a separate harness to run to the ignition module. So we'll weasel it out of here. There's our little pip connector. You pull that out and it locks it in base timing so you can set the timing. We're just going to slide this harness out of here. Why they didn't include it with the other harness that disconnected at the top of the engine, I don't know. We can unbolt our ground from our cowl. Just a little strap goes to the back of the block. Usually the thing you forget until you have the engine halfway out and you hear tearing sounds. Now we can head underneath the car and pull our inspection cover down, and we can see our oil leak. And of course, because it's a Ford, we have to have two different sizes here to pull this cover off. One wasn't enough. Now we can see our torque converter nuts. There's studs on the torque converter, and then the nuts go through the flex plate. I'm not sure if I like this better than the ones that have the bolts and the nuts welded to the torque converter. It's harder to get lined up when you're putting the engine and trans together, but once it is, you can tighten up the nuts and move to the next one. You don't have to start all the bolts like you do on the other ones before you tighten them all up. So I guess if I had to choose, I would choose not this style. Spin the motor over a little bit so we can see our next nut. We'll take this one the rest of the way out. We'll turn it, and it'll either turn the motor over so we can see the next nut or break it loose. Either way, I don't care. I'm going to find a place for our pry bar. These fragile threads here look like a good place to push on. And we'll spin our last nut off of there. Just to make sure, we'll wiggle it around, and if it clanks back and forth, we know it's loose. And now we need to get to our exhaust bolts. There's one there, and there used to be one there. But luckily, the other side matches. There's a broken bolt on this side. And one more holding everything together up here. These broken exhaust studs were another contributing factor in my decision to pull the engine out of this thing. I don't want to struggle with them up in there. Now we're going to pull this little X brace off the bottom before I whack my head in it. It's supposed to attach the bottom of the radiator support in the front and the cradle in the middle. But since we don't have radiator support, it's just dangling out there waiting for me to walk into it. So we're just going to pull the front half down. We'll leave the back half in there that bolts to the rails. We'll put the bolts back in so we don't lose them. And now that our head is safe, at least from that brace, we can go back to taking our exhaust manifold bolts off. Now, I know better than to try and loosen them up without heat, because there is no way those are coming apart. So we'll pry the exhaust manifold over a little bit, on the cat actually, and get our heat induction tool in there to heat up that nut. Just enough room in there. These heat induction tools are great if you're working in tight areas and don't want to light anything on fire, or you happen to be a recovering pyromaniac. Just put the end of it, if it's coiled up around the nut, press the button, and hold it till it's orange. And then work real fast to get a socket on it and buzz it off of there, because it seems like it heats up the parts really quick, but they also cool really quickly, so you don't have a lot of time. And if you'd like to pick up one of these magical tools, they are available in my Amazon store. They're a little pricey, but they are worth it. And they do come with a bunch of different attachments. Socket on there. And we got our nut off of there without breaking anything.
Resist the urge to touch.
Now we have to disconnect our oxygen sensors because they're going to stay with our exhaust, and the plugs actually stay with the engine harness. There's one on each side. Just press the little tab and pull them apart. Now we'll get our one exhaust stud on this side. You can kind of see it up there. Wait for the orange glow to let you know it's done cooking. Side there was no easy way to get to it, so we had to use our swivel. And we'll drop that nut on the floor and pick it up later when we won't be branding ourselves by touching it. Now we can unbolt our starter. Need to weasel our ratchet up here, get to that top bolt. An extension on it, we can get to the back of the starter and get it out of there. Bottom bolt, really easy to get to. And just slide the starter back. Pretty easy to get these out of here. Dangle here for a second and go grab our sockets. And then bolt our positive cable and our starter wire. And somebody's been here before. This is a aftermarket starter. We can unbolt our clamp for our secondary air injection. Probably not going to come apart there, but want to have that clamp loose just in case. And we're going to unbolt the other end of that pipe, which is bolted to the side of the head. This tube should continue up to the air pump and bolt to the back of the air pump, but they took the rest of those lines out when they removed the air pump. And the other one up above it just goes to the back of the heads, so it can go with the engine for now. And there's our bell housing bolt, way back there. We can see all of them. We're going to try and get to them. Maybe we can break them all loose with a wrench and get our hand in there and take them out. Because the alternative is to drop the back of the trans down and get the bolts from down below. And I don't want to do that if I don't have to. So we can get our wrench on there and break it loose and see if we can get our fingers on there. But of course you get half a turn and it locks back up, so we got to put our wrench back on there. My kung fu grip isn't what it used to be. So we're just going to do this 1/8 of a turn at a time until we lose all of our patience. Try it again. Get a couple more turns. This is probably the worst one because there's cables and dipstick tubes and everything else mounted there. And since we used up all of our patience disconnecting all the electrical connectors, we didn't have any more for those bell housing bolts. So we're going to plan B. We're going to drop the back of the trans down. In order to do that, we just pull our trans cross member bolts out. We do have a stand underneath the trans mount. These are just nuts and bolts. Run all the way through. And let our trans down in the back a little bit. We don't have to take the drive shaft off or the exhaust or anything. Just going to drop down a little bit. Just to give us a little more room in there. So we can get our sockets with a bunch of extensions and our ratchet. Break these loose. Once we get it spinning, we can switch over to our electric impact. Just to quickly buzz it out the rest of the way. And here we have my daisy chain of extensions. Usually I have one long one, but that's at work, so we just put a bunch of them together to get where we needed to get to. This side is even worse. I think there's 4 of them on this side. But works the same way. Break it loose and spin the bolt out of there with our impact. Luckily they weren't super tight, so we didn't have a problem. You lose a lot of torque when you start connecting one to another. Yep, there were 4 on this side, and a swivel at the end. Somebody's been here before. This transmission was rebuilt at some time. There's a shocker, a Mustang Trans that didn't make it to 100,000 miles. I don't know when it was replaced, but I do know it shifts just fine, so I'm not going to worry about it. Just a bonus. So we're on to our next bell housing bolt. Same process, break it loose, spin it out with the impact. Try not to wedge it between the firewall. And we lost one of our extensions. And now we're just going to poke at the bolt and try and knock it out of there. I could get a magnet, but that's too far away. And I'm lazy. So, like I said, we're just going to poke at it so it falls out of there. Well, this is probably the easiest one. You can almost get right at it. A little corrosion on that bolt helps lock it in there. And one more on the bottom on the other side. Getting these out is the easy part. Getting them in is going to be a little bit more of a struggle. Luckily, we don't have to worry about that today. We'll worry about that when everything else is done or we're putting the engine back in. So we got it broke loose. Squeeze our impact in there. We'll buzz it out of there. And we're going to try and get our bolt out of there without losing it. I think we got them all. So now we can put our engine and trans back up there. Put our bolts through our cross member. Go up a little higher to get this one through. And we have to go back down to get it through the other side. Now we'll put the nuts on the other side so our bolts don't end up falling out of there and our trans falling on the floor. And so we don't forget where all of our nuts and bolts go. Now you can take our stand out. Give a little spritz of magic loosening juice to our engine mount studs. They're a little rusty. They should come off. Ford was pretty serious about these engine mounts. Can't really get an impact in there, so we gotta do it by hand. So the penetrating oil just helps it spin off a little easier. One side down. Head over to the other side. No heat required because the stud is so thick. And even though there was a little bit of rust, it wasn't too bad. There's slots in the top of that subframe. That's what the stud slides down into. So we're going to have to slide it out of there to get the engine out. We'll unbolt our trans-cooler lines that are bolted to the side of the block, since the transmission isn't going with us. And now we're going to pull the rear bolts out of our engine mounts. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get that engine mount all the way up to get it out of those slots. And I want to have these out just in case I do have to remove these engine mounts in the middle of pulling the engine. It's going to be really hard to climb under and get to those, so at least they'll be done. I'll leave the front ones in there for now because if I take them out, I'm afraid the engine's going to slide forward because there's really nothing holding it in right now. So now we're going to unplug our gas lines, pull the little safety collars off, and put our little quick release clips in there, slide it up and release the springs inside. I usually do the gas lines at the end just in case there's anything I need to heat with actually an open flame. I don't want the gas catching on fire. Safety first, always on my channel. So I'm pretty sure that we're not going to have to heat anything else, so we're free to take off our gas lines and spray ourselves in the face with gas because, well, I don't think it's a safe way and release the fuel pressure. We'll do that now. There wasn't that much in it, so we're fine. Get our fuel lines off and let all that liquid gold just flood the floor. And one more harness up here we forgot. We'll unplug that, tuck that up in the engine. Make sure we can see all the way around. And we got some heater hoses. So somebody's been here before. This is supposed to be a spring clamp. And this might be the one time where I was hoping for a spring clamp because I really can't get the screwdriver in there. And I'm too lazy to walk over and get a ratchet to loosen that up. So we're just going to struggle. This side still has a spring clamp. Slide that back. Looks like somebody might have put a heater core in here at one time. Can't see why they would have had those lines off otherwise unless they were flushing out the heater core. But the hoses came right off, so it was pretty recent whatever they were doing. Got a pry bar in there just to help us pull this hose off. And we'll save that clamp. Disconnect our coil wire and set that off on the engine. And we can pull our power steering pressure line off of here. This is actually a new line, along with the new pump, and a new bracket, and a new water pump. Somebody just sunk some money into this car. We got the hose off the pump. Now we'll unbolt it from the frame rail. It's going to be on our way later. And we'll put the screw back in there so we don't lose it. I'll pull the return line off the bottom, just a spring clamp, so we'll slide that down and wiggle the hose off of there. And there is a drain pan underneath. It's not going all over the floor. See, I wasn't lying, it really is. So we got a jack underneath the bell housing, so we'll jack it up a little bit. We can start up our mobile frame rack and lift our engine out. We're going to do this nice and slow, make sure that we didn't miss anything. And make sure we're not smashing up the cowl, the firewall, or any little plastic pieces that might be on the back of the engine. Just need to get it high enough to clear those studs for the engine mounts, then we can go forward a little bit, and we'll have plenty of room. The steering shaft is almost up against the manifold on the driver's side, so got to be careful there as well. We're going to keep checking as we're lifting just to make sure everything's disconnected and we're not testing the tensile strength of any wires or plugs. Using the forklift to unplug stuff is definitely the most efficient way to unplug it, although putting it back together afterwards is a little difficult. So it looks like we're out of our engine mounts. We're free from our trans. Just making sure that we're not going to snag on anything else. Even if everything's disconnected, sometimes harnesses like to grab on. I think we got it far enough away that we can move everything away from it. Some wires here that wanted to snag on something else. Starter wires, actually. Looks good. No throttle cables so they don't belong. And away we go. And if you're wondering, yes, those are factory headers. And to keep our trans from falling down, we just stuffed a old frame rail and a board in there. Slightly more horsepower than the motor we took out.
You shouldn't be surprised. If you buy a Ford, you're going to be pushing it at some point.
Now we're going to pull our airbag out of here and make sure that the airbag is the only thing we need to replace, that the clock spring wasn't damaged or anything. This one's pretty easy, no special tools required, no turning the steering wheel to a certain angle to get these little tabs. Just 4 10mm bolts on the back side, and you can pretty much access them directly without turning the wheel too far. Spin those out of there. They're actually nuts. The studs are on the back of the airbag. Pull our airbag out of there and unplug it. These have a pigtail on them so they don't get melted like the newer styled ones. And our clock spring looks okay, so we just need an airbag. Now we're going to get everything off of our aprons, so we're ready to start drilling out our spot welds or grinding them out, whatever we're going to do. This side's pretty easy. Just a couple of relays that are screwed into it. Hold this wiring harness up over here along with our vacuum line. And the inside of this apron is nice and empty, ready to work on. You have a little vacuum can on the outside. Pull the vacuum line off of it. One screw in the back, and then a Christmas tree up in the front. I believe this is for the secondary air injection, so we probably don't need it, but we'll put it back because it was there. Get rid of the dead bugs. Put our screw back in here so we know where it goes. And we're ready to work on the outside of this rail. Now over to the driver's side where they packed in a lot more junk. So we can unbolt the starter solenoid. Tuck that off to the side. Then we can unbolt our coil. And this last bolt is hidden behind the brake line, so we'll have to use our ratcheting wrench. We're not going to unplug the coil, we're going to leave it all together, just because there is 0% chance of that plug coming out in one piece. Unclip our harness for our airbag sensor, and unplug that. So it's kind of tucked behind all that mess. We can unclip our harness from the rail, pull the rest of it out of the apron, and fish the rest of it through the hole in the radiator support. One more ground wire. Put the screw back in there so we remember where it goes. And this whole ball of spaghetti can just sit up on top of the tower out of our way. Good luck figuring out where that goes later. We'll pull the hood cable out later. I don't feel like messing with it now.
So that's as far as we're gonna go on the Mustang for today. It's all tucked in and taking a nap over here. Got to cover it up because the roof leaks, and I don't really need it getting all full of whatever comes out of the roof. Also have the engine under a cover so it can take a nap. As soon as the frame rack is open, we'll push it over there and clamp it up and pull the rest of our frame rails around, measure everything, and get it all fitted and welded up. That might take a little while. There's a shop car up on the frame rack, and you know, I would say quality takes time, but well, things been out there for 2 weeks and that definitely isn't the case. So I'll see you when the frame rack is free. Thanks for watching.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh- I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh- I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.